your Savior. We are going to pray. Some of us here are victims of divination. You went for a meeting in search of a solution, in search of something, an instant intervention. And unknown to you, the spirit that powers what you went to look for is contrary. That's where most of your challenges began from. It would have been better for you to retain that initial problem than to use that problem as an excuse to enter into that pool. Some of you here had wonderful anointings coming up in your life until someone laid hands on you. And the moment those hands were laid, what was springing forth dried up. Can we pray today?
All right, welcome to Potter's Media, and I'm glad to have you here once again on this episode of the video. Well, I'm sure most of us are familiar with this saying that Africans, we are too religious, and a lot of churches in Africa that we so much believe in witchcraft. Some people have suggested that this is one of the reasons that have kept Africa underdeveloped, simply because we believe in the existence of witchcraft, which in the actual sense, according to them, does not exist. And some even go ahead and say that bringing comparison with countries like in Europe, that in such countries they don't believe in witchcraft, and because there is no existence of witchcraft and everything that we got to know about the supernatural, and because of that they have been prospering in their economy and their ways of life. But we have heard people come to say the Bible is fake news, that Christianity is fake news, and what have you. We've had a whole lot of people abusing Christianity. But then I saw a video, the interview of a woman who actually confessed to have been born into witchcraft and was saved by the saving grace which is in the name of Jesus Christ. She gave a lot of exposition in what the practice of witchcraft was like for her, that she was born into a family that actually practiced witchcraft. And I was asking myself a question. So these things that people are actually condemning by the that they call the practices of Africa actually exists. Well, I do know it exists. For the benefit of people that might be doubting, or that might be thinking, that might be doubting, or that might be thinking that these things are charades, these things are not true. That is why I decided to do this video, and I want us to see the interview of this wonderful woman, how she explained her experiences in her journey, or in her introduction into witchcraft, and how God finally delivered her. So I want us to go into this interview of this confession by this woman, and we'll come back again and I will share my thoughts. As usual, I want us to make use of the comment section. Give us your report, give us your responses. We want to know what you think concerning this video.
Well, you know, I was reading some of your story. It's just a fascinating story, but I feel like we probably need to go back to your family of origin and kind of what you were born into, because there were a lot of doors that were opened, and people don't even realize some of the doors that you opened to the supernatural and to darkness. And you experienced that as a child. Kind of tell us about when you were born and growing up, some of the things that happened.
Yes. Well, my grandmother was into witchcraft. She was into voodoo. She had voodoo dolls, and me and my two older sisters were very young when we were introduced to witchcraft and incantation books by my grandmother. And we would, like any normal child back in the early 70s, we were performing seances with our friends down the street and into horoscopes.
Did you play with Ouija boards?
Yes, the Ouija
tarot
boards.
Cards.
Yes, we didn't do the tarot cards so much when we were young.
A lot of people don't even realize the danger of a Ouija board.
No, they don't.
You
are opening up a portal. Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Definitely.
All right. So did you see like supernatural things as a child?
We did. We actually had a familiar spirit. Her name was Mrs. Corral. And our parents introduced us to her and said she was our familiar spirit, and that she would be the one that would guide us through our life and take care of us.
And what did that look like, sound like? For people watching, like, wait, what?
Well, it was normal for us. I mean, we would we were told that she came into the family from an old antique piece of furniture. And so she lived in this old hutch, and my sisters and I would start out with just asking questions, and we'd put our hand underneath the hutch, and we would say, okay, so a breath of fresh air, or yes or no, and tap on the wood part of the hutch. And it was just like in a Ouija board. You're asking it questions, and she's giving us answers.
And how would that spirit respond?
Well, it would be just typical childhood questions. Are we going to get married?
How would the spirit respond back to you? Would you actually hear tapping? Or
Yes.
Would you feel wind blowing?
Yes, we would. We would be sitting there watching TV. The front door would open. The screen door would open. We would hear footsteps behind us. And she was our friend. We were told that she was our friend. And there was one particular occasion when it was in the middle of the night, and there was crashing of dishes I heard in the kitchen. And so I ran down the hall, and our kitchen curtains were on fire. And the cabinets were opening, and dishes were flying, and my parents, because of the commotion, got up. I made it to the kitchen first and saw the curtains on fire. And my parents came in, and when my parents got in there, the fire just went out. And I remember my parents telling me, now, this is how she takes care of us. She woke somebody up to tell us that there was a fire in the house. And so we trusted her.
Wow.
And our parents were totally on board with it.
And what were your parents involved in? Because you talked about your grandmother. Did that kind of segue into your parents being involved in witchcraft?
Well, my dad really wasn't so much, but my mother, I don't really know a lot about her childhood, but I know that her mother would have seances and invite people over and have my mother be a participant of that while she was growing up. And so it was passed on through that generations. And so it was familiar with my mom.
So talk about some of the things that happened to you personally as a child and how, of course, it would affect you later.
And so long as you have opened up yourself to portals of wickedness, you never can tell what that man will turn out to be. One thing about these demons is that they will come and promise you this. You could imagine what the mom told the daughter, that Kara, which is the familiar spirit that they were introduced to, is their friend, and Kara will be guiding them through. And even the case of the fire incident that happened, that this their so-called friend had to wake one of them so that they can see and quench the fire. But then, from the interviews which you have seen, you see how this family have been subjected to unnecessary wickedness because they opened up a portal for demons to come and be their Lord, to come and be their guiding spirit, and they want that we enrich them and empower them. So this thing is happening right in America. So those of you thinking that it's just only a practice, that most of us, those of you that lives in denial of the existence of this, and even making comparisons with countries in America, that, well, for Americans, they don't believe in these things. Well, you are all seeing this video. This is not an African person giving a confession. This is a lady in America giving this confession. I mean, what does she have to gain? She does not have anything to gain. This is not something that was organized by an African. This is purely an interview organized and granted by white people, and they are giving testimony to the existence of this. I want us to go more into the series of interviews, and you will get to hear more of our confessions and our ordeal, and of course how she was able to come out of it
while she was growing up. And so it was passed on through that generations, and so it was familiar with my mom.
So talk about some of the things that happened to you personally as a child and how, of course, it would affect you later, but there's a lot of people watching who have maybe not gone through that particular experience but have experienced abuse.
Yes, well, as we got a little bit older, my dad wasn't so much into the seances and all of that, but he started coming into a lot of money all of a sudden. And we were buying new houses, new cars, and it was strange because I didn't really know what was going on. I was the youngest of the three, and I would be waking up at night hearing screaming and yelling and fighting, and my sister and my mom would be fighting with him, and Fortunately, my older sister got out of the house early enough. She started her own family, but my dad took it a step further and got into Satanism. It started out with him just taking me up to his workplace and smoking a joint with me. I mean, I was getting high with my dad when I was in 5th grade.
Wow.
And just the gateway drug, was just marijuana, and then it excelled from there, and then fondling started, and the drugs got harder. And by the time...
So he was molesting you?
He was, yes, it got into molesting me when I got addicted to the drugs. Within the year, I was so addicted to the drugs.
Did your mom know this was going on?
My mother said that she doesn't know that it was going on. And there were times when we were teenagers when I would go out on a date and I would have to wake up one of my parents when we got home to let them know we were home. And I would always try to sneak in and wake up my mom because I knew what my dad would do. And he always wanted me to tell him about the date and get into the sexual perversions and all of that of it. And so every time I would sneak in to try and wake up my mom, she would never wake up. And so I don't know if she was being drugged. I don't know if she was ignoring the situation. So it was my dad, by the time I was 12 years old, I was so addicted to the drugs that he started doing sexual sacrifices with me and started chanting. He'd wake me up in the middle of the night, come into my room, lock the door. And in my mind...
You can imagine the parents of these children, in order to ensure that this lady giving this confession conforms, she had to let us see the turmoil and the ordeal which our sister that have decided to rebel against those practices, what she had to pass through.
That at an early time. And my sister that was 2 years older than me, she was very rebellious. She was stubborn. She was in and out of juvie and just because she was bucking up against my dad. She was not willing to, participate, and that was her way of dealing with it. Well, in order for my parents to contain her, they took her to a psychiatric hospital. And they diagnosed her with bipolar schizophrenia, put her in a straitjacket. This was in the early 70s, so they were giving her elephant tranquilizers, electric shock treatments. And I remember going and seeing her one day. I didn't know where I was going, but my parents pulled up to the psychiatric hospital, and I went in to see my sister, unrecognizable. She could not chew her food. She couldn't talk. And on our way out, I heard my dad say, "This is what will happen.
If you don't.
If I don't conform, yes." And I feared for my life. He constantly reminded me that there was no way out of this lifestyle. I better keep my mouth shut. I better not tell anybody. And so I feared as I was married the first time at 18 years old and married for 2 years, and my husband didn't have any idea of my background. We had a son together. And when he found out about my lifestyle, and I was a prostitute at night and a mother during the day so that I could afford my habit, and we ended up getting divorced. I tried to cover up my lifestyle, sleeping in my car. I had a part-time job, and the authorities caught up with me, and I lost total custody of my son, who was 2 years old at the time. And so there I was back on the streets, and we lived in Texas at the time, so I didn't know anybody else except my husband and his family.
And that was a good family, right?
It was a good family.
It's the one, eventually you're going to come back to one, to one of the father-in-laws.
Yes,
Is this the one that come back?
At that time when I lived here in Texas with and was married to his son, he was not a Christian.
Yeah.
But he did talk about being a Christian at one time. He used to be an evangelist.
Okay.
And so that was really the first introduction to true Christianity, was when I knew him. Other than watching Jesus Christ Superstar movie when I was younger, at least 12 to 15 times. But little did I know that Jesus was planting that seed in me at that moment.
Yeah.
I always remembered who Jesus was. I know the movie was kind of a mockery. It was like a play. And at the end, there was no death, burial, and resurrection.
Right.
It was just the end of the play, the end of Jesus. But later on in life, God used that to bring that to my remembrance.
God can use anything.
Oh, yes.
He can use a donkey to rebuke a prophet.
Yes.
So then you get married again. You have another child, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And
had a daughter, and that didn't work out either. And
you're still addicted to drugs?
Very much so.
How long? This is a long time.
This is a long time. I had my first son when I was 23 and my daughter when I was 26. And I was just trying to find true love.
You could imagine what that means. You know, all these things, even some of the movies, you could see some of these things that she's saying being acted in the movie. But we might just see them as movie. But these things are not actually things that we take lightly. These are things that do exist. How can a parent give birth to that? How can a parent decide to descend to a place, to a position of molesting his own daughter, and not just molesting his own daughter, to the extent of subjecting one of the ladies, one of his daughters, into unnecessary hardship, unnecessary torture, just to remind others that this is what will happen to you if you don't conform. That is to tell you the extent at which people, when they are fully taken off the devil, when they are fully possessed of the devil, what they can do for the devil. And there's something I also want you to take note in our series of confession. The dad is a rich man. He had money to buy the cars, buy the houses, but then all these gifts that were given by the devil as a prize.
You know, I practiced witchcraft as similar to what I did when I was younger. I never got into the Satanism. That was forced upon me, going deeper into that realm.
What is the difference between witchcraft and Satanism? Because, I mean, like, they're all in the same pool together.
Yeah, they are. Witchcraft is, well, every form of Satanism: witchcraft, control, necromancy, sorcery, divination, talking to the dead, conjuring up spirits. But Satanism is blatant serving Satan, doing it for Satan, where sacrifices are involved. Sexual sacrifices, blood sacrifices, human sacrifices. That's the difference.
So your dad was actually doing some of that.
Yes, yes, and he used me as a sexual sacrifice. I mean, I lost my virginity to my own dad when I was young.
Wow.
Through this. And so in my mind, that was how life was supposed to be. Sexual, perverted, and surrounded by drug addiction.
Yeah. So let's talk about the moment.
The moment.
The moment.
The
we have a
moment.
song we sing, This Is Your Moment.
Well, this was my moment.
Okay.
This was my moment.
So take us back to that night.
June
that day.
1993.
See, she remembers.
I do.
People remember this.
Yes.
June
yes.
1993.
Yes, June 1993. My daughter was almost 3 years old. And the night before, I had a black hooded entity come to me and remind me of the generational cycle that I needed to pass on to my children.
So you actually saw a black hooded spirit.
Yes.
And you talked to it. Or
he talked to me, and he kept saying, it's time for you to pass on to your daughter what your grandmother had passed on to you. At that moment in my life, I knew there was no control over this. There was no way that I could control or keep my daughter safe, save my life. And so in my mind, I just wanted to take my life. I would be dead. I would be no more trauma. My daughter would be adopted, possibly into a family where she would have some kind of hope at a normal life. And I dropped her off at the babysitter, drove out to a remote area with a razor blade in my car, and in the front seat of my car, I contemplated taking my life. I was ready to take my life then at that moment. And as I was crying, I laid my seat back, had my razor blade in my hand, and my other hand fell to the side in between my console and my seat, and I felt something. I got this car from a drug dealer. There's no way that anything in this car that I didn't know about got in there, but I picked this up, and it was a New Testament Gideon Bible. This is the very Bible.
Let me see.
That I found
the
in my
Gideon
car.
Bible, folks.
Yes.
There it was, right there.
In my car.
Amazing.
My drug dealers were not Christians. I didn't have any affiliation with Christians at that moment, or even know to this day how that Bible got there. But as I sat there in the front seat of my car, working through the tears, I opened it up and I looked in the back, and there was a sinner's prayer in the back. And I gave my life to Jesus right there in the front seat of my car. And
Wow.
it was amazing. I felt such a peace that I had never felt in my entire life. And I literally felt like someone had come and put their arms around me and said, I am your father. I am your father now. You go and get your baby girl, and I will take care of you.
Wow.
And so I went and I picked up my daughter, and I was so excited. I didn't know to go to church. I didn't know any Christians. I just knew the sinner's prayer. I must have said it 15 times on the way to pick up my daughter.
Just to make sure it worked, right?
Yes. It was the only thing. Every time I said it, I felt the peace all over,
Oh,
the
my
Holy
goodness.
Spirit just working in my life. And
That is so amazing, for people watching and listening, for people that I've interviewed in the occult, that once they encounter the presence of God, or they feel that peace for the first time, it's so life-changing that because they've experienced such darkness, that the decision to stay here with the peace is so much easier because you know how dark the other side is.
Yes.
Now, there is something also worthy of note about the operations of the demonic. They also love their presence to be transgenerational. And that is why you will start hearing in Africa things like generational curses, generational spirits, ancestral curses, and all of that is because the devil loves their practices to be practiced from one generation and to the other. In this woman's case, she actually saw a black wooded being appear to her and reminded her of the need for her to transfer everything she had received from her grandmom, even to her children. So that is to tell you, the devil understands generational impacts, generational curses, generational bondages. And that is why when somebody gets into captivity like that, the devil will seize every opportunity to make sure they don't just get hold of you, but they get hold of your generation. And this is my concern particularly for people that are into Yahoo Plus within these Nigerian spaces. People that goes into Yahoo Plus, they might think that they are going to the devil to get wealth and to get riches, not knowing that the devil is not just only interested in giving you wealth and getting you to captivity. They are also interested in taking this thing far beyond you, even to your generation.